Whatever they do, people leave trails behind them. Mostly they're trails of paper and writing, but also pictures, sounds, and many other kinds of records. The detective work of following these records into the past can be extremely rewarding, personally, historically, even financially. But it's only possible if they are carefully preserved and organized in archives. The shelves of archives join the past, present, and future. The stacks, the light and climate-controlled areas where the materials are actually kept, all look much the same. But each archive has its own distinctive personality. The Detroit-Windsor Auto Tunnel. Opened in 1930, it's the only international tunnel open to cars and trucks in the world. An important trade link and an enormous construction project, it was built by a consortium of local businesses. To acquire the land, the company made an agreement with the city of Windsor. Over the years, the city could buy back the rights from the Tunnel Corporation so that 60 years from the day the ribbon was cut, the city would own the tunnel.
As the 60 years approached, the owners of the tunnel, which of course had changed, decided that wasn't too good a deal for them, because what it would have meant was giving up an asset that was probably worth $15 to $20 million for nothing. So they chose to not honor the agreement. The city of Windsor hired counsel to take them to court.
We were asked in 1986 to conduct a search by the Commissioner of Finance to determine what documents we might have. And as it turned out, not only did we have sufficient documentation, we also were able to gain access to other departments' records which were not under our custody. We did this through very, very basic archival control, inventories and so on, simply knowing where the records were. One of the things that nearly lost the case for the city of Windsor was the city clerk's inability to locate the original signed agreement. It wasn't their fault, really. There was a flaw in their records-keeping program, something which the archives was able to determine. But our main documentation came from the legal department files, which were stored in an off-site location. The legal department did not know that these files existed. And from that point of view, because we had, as I said, a very basic archival control over them, we were able to present 1,125 photocopied pages of information for the city to go into court with.
In fact, it went to the Supreme Court, and the city of Windsor won the case.
The importance of these documents doubles when you stop to think that most of the principals who had been involved in setting up the agreement in 1928, and indeed in the construction of the tunnel in 1930, were dead. So that the only thing left was the documents, and the documents provided the story, and the story won the case for the city of Windsor.
Ownership by the city will mean that we control a service that is very essential to the economy of the city of Windsor. The bottom line is we end up with an asset that is worth about 15 or 20 million. That asset will generate profits. The city of Windsor certainly benefited by the presence of the archives and benefited more by the excellent work that they have done in preparing the documents for that type of use.
An archives may be responsible for keeping the records of a single organization, or it might contain collections from many different sources, as many public and university archives do. What's as important as keeping the materials is making sure that they're organized and accessible with the aid of trained archivists. Archivists are responsible for determining what will be of lasting value. They use many different criteria to appraise materials: the administrative, financial, or legal value to the organization that created the materials, the age and uniqueness of the documents or objects, how the materials fit the policy of the collection, and what they add to it.
Oh boy, we better open that up in the conservation lab.
As items arrive, they are accessioned. An accession record is the first stage in controlling and organizing archives. It specifies the source of the materials, describes their contents, and gives them numbers to identify and catalog them. Libraries shelve publications by subject, but archives generally respect the original order of the materials. Yet they still have to be processed, sorted, arranged, and filed to preserve them the best way possible. Donations can arrive in pretty unlikely containers. What looks like garbage could turn out to be valuable, and some materials may need special care.
It'll take a lot of hours of conservation work before these can be in some sort of usable condition. The way they are at the moment, no researcher would want to touch them. They really look horrible. Paper, of course, forms the bulk of material in an archival collection. So therefore, as an archival conservator, the majority of things that I work on are paper. This is an architectural drawing of St. Mark's Church in Banfield. I guess the most notable thing about this drawing are the huge tears. We're really lucky that it's not in two pieces. Often archival material does come in pieces. Here are some fragments of documents, marriage licenses. That little piece goes there, and it's going to be a bit of a jigsaw puzzle to put these others together. When I repair this architectural drawing, I'll be very careful to ensure that I use materials that won't create problems. I'm going to use a wheat starch paste and a Japanese tissue, and we know that they won't cause problems in terms of staining. I'm now going to apply the Japanese repair tissue to the verso. This is a very strong, lightweight paper, and it will not in any way contaminate the drawing. Starch paste must be allowed to dry under pressure.
Appraisal, accession, processing, conservation. 4 stages before archival materials can be used. An archives may be open to the public or just for the organization it serves, but it will be used. Descriptive finding aids, inventories, and indexes help archivists and users to take full advantage of a collection. The archivist coordinates access to the collection, where information can be found in many media.
That he may receive at your hands the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa, John George Diefenbaker.
Most material is accessible, but there may be restrictions on legally or personally sensitive documents. Freedom of information regulations make the responsibilities and training of the archivist particularly important in large facilities like the Ontario Provincial Archives, or small ones like the collection of the Anglican Church's Ontario Diocese. Many different organizations have found value in setting up archives. The National Ballet of Canada, they're rehearsing the Nutcracker with the dancer who founded the company in 1951, Celia Franca. She and the Nutcracker are lasting and treasured parts of the National Ballet's history, and memories of them are preserved in the company's collection. Ideally, an archive should have a degree of independence, though the purpose and goals of the archives must meet the needs of its sponsoring organization.
In order to be an archives, we can't just be a room in the back that people give their materials that they don't want. We want to be a working resource center where people can take things from the past to find historical documentation of things and also use it towards the future, because otherwise we sit here collecting files. So often the general manager, the artistic director, the press, publicity department all use the material within the archives daily to make a decision about the future. In the development of the archives, it was found that so many people needed information and so many people needed to be educated about ballet in order to appreciate it, that the education department grew as a separate project. And we've developed it to the point where not only students but adults learn about the world of dance, not only about the National Ballet, but about the world of dance in general, because a more educated ballet audience is good for our company and also the arts in Canada. Some of the projects that we've designed include something called Ballet Notes, and they're in-depth study guides to the ballet repertoire. And they not only contain information about the ballet, the story of the ballet, but the choreography, the sets, the music, and the costumes.
Every performance of the ballet is unique. It's gone forever once the curtain comes down, but it can be kept in photographs, videotape, technical and staging notes, and the notations that document the choreography of a production. The National Ballet set up its archives in 1975. The Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce has had an archives of sorts since 1903. It's located in the bank's head office. Dwarfed by the towers of Bay Street, it's hard to remember that the building was once the tallest in the British Commonwealth and marked the Toronto skyline. The history of the bank was written within the walls of this elegant old building. The bank is establishing a modern archival facility. For the moment, though, until renovations and the establishment of a permanent space are complete, materials are stored in rooms off an underground parking garage. The Bank of Commerce coordinates its archives with the management of current corporate records. Only 5 to 8% may need to be kept permanently, but management and individual departments might have to be convinced that what they produce may have lasting value.
The main thing, though, to keep in mind is that the archives are not set up from a department setting out to establish historical material. The archival material is actually part of the day-to-day operation. And what we're looking at the CIBC is, in fact, the issue of controlling the archives through an active records management program so that we can identify how the records are created, what's created, what can be disposed of, when it can be disposed of, and what should be transferred to the archives for a regular reference. So we're looking at the archives from an administrative standpoint to assist within the corporate memory, if you wish, of the bank itself, and maintaining that corporate memory to show the direction that it's changed over the years.
Three-quarters of the archives inquiries come from inside the bank to support its business in a community or to attract new business. Corporate banking centers ask questions about the bank's history in a region.
How long has the bank been there? What branches does it have? What activities has it undertaken? That could well go towards assisting one of our corporate banking centers in actually attracting a client to use the services of the CIBC. So we're looking at different applications and different uses, again stressing the management support as well as the cultural element.
A bank is often one of the first structures in a city or town, and one of the most prominent. Some people might not measure the value of archives to a community in dollars, but in history. The region of Peel Archives has an active schools program, and these Brampton students are getting a picture of their hometown from a time before they were born.
Our story date is March 16, 1948, and the title, Disaster. Disaster in the form of thousands of tons of raging water and rampant blocks of ice. Disaster which the town had known in varying degrees on past occasions. Reckon in your mind as you watch these scenes, not only the actual dollar damage, but the potential health danger, the loss of utilities, the sewage problem, the personal inconvenience of the moment.
This is a tropical area over here. So that's where it's from. Which would mean that, I guess maybe this would be more or less, this is Brampton here.
They had their village right about here. You can see on that map on the wall a little better where the Indian village was. So at the time that the whole of Toronto Township...
We began this program about 3 years ago as a response to a request from a teacher who had a large class that he couldn't bring into the archives due to distance and wanted me to photocopy archival documents for him to use. And we had nothing available. We did it at that time for him, but realized that in doing that we'd created a resource that perhaps could be used again and again. At the same time, we were finding that being in this building, which has a fairly high profile in the community, teachers were also quite interested in bringing their children in to have a look around. So we realized that we had to have something here as well.
Yeah, that's true. Think also about things like rabies. I mean, did people take their dogs to veterinarians back then? No.
They're shown copies and originals from the collection. And it's done in a chronological basis, so they're learning a little bit about the history of Peel at the same time as they're learning what an archives is all about.
I'm trying to find out where I live.
Or Steele.
Where you live, you won't find it.
It's very similar to the terminal.
There's sort of an ooh, ah, when you tell them it's 160 years old, and they don't get that from a copy. So I think that's why it's important that they can look at originals. They're very interested in knowing what we've done to help protect the documents and why certain documents have tears or rips and what we've done to help that. They're interested in the nuts and bolts of it. Certainly anything that they can read themselves, such as letters and diaries, where you're getting a first-hand account from someone of what it was like to be alive at that time.
What does that say? In Creek?
Really hard to know.
Okay, in Owl Creek. Friend as you have been.
We have a particular journal we use a lot, and the story in it is about a 14-year-old boy who was a pioneer, son of a pioneer, and the family was heading up into Albion Township, and Joseph tells the tale through a 14-year-old's eyes of what that trip was like. That's a very unique point of view that they don't get very often. Certainly they don't get through their textbooks.
This is the one on the flooding.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, money is always fascinating. They're always thrilled to know what things cost, and they think if only they could go back with their allowance, you know, and they'd be able to clean up.
Brampton kids exploring records of the past follow a trail they connect with their present day. So do city administrators back in Windsor, with important results for development plans.
The background to the waterfront is that for 70 or 80 years the city had wanted to acquire and develop the sea and waterfront lands totaling about 35 acres. We finally found out in 1982 that yes, we could get them, and in 1983 a plan was prepared showing how the lands could be developed.
The city administrator sent us a memo asking us to deal with a request that had come in from a local Windsorite detailing a cholera epidemic that had broken out in Windsor in 1854. It appears that a number of Scandinavian immigrants had been coming through on their way to the United States during the time of their train ride on the Great Western Railway had contracted cholera. When they arrived here, some were dead, some were dying, they were hospitalized, but the point was the city was then faced with the notion of a cemetery on the sea and riverfront lands which were slated for development.
So that naturally would be of great concern to us because if there was a lot of people interred in there, naturally, of course, arrangements would have to be made either to leave them there or to reinter them somewhere else, and it's a very, very sensitive subject. So we were concerned as to whether or not these people were interred in the waterfront. So we turned to the municipal archivist, to Mark Walsh, and I might say parenthetically that several years ago I had little or no use for archives. I was a total non-believer.
We knew that it would be important to check back to the early council minutes and council records, and we found little tidbits here and there that told us some things about what was going on. For example, we found the local Board of Health was expanded, and that meant there was some activity. We found a petition to the Lieutenant Governor from the city appealing for relief from the medical costs that were associated with this. We found a reference in the council minutes of the day saying that they were considering buying a public burying ground, and again, there was a reason for that. But there was nothing definite that said this is where the bodies were. So we, again, told the city administrator that the records indicated certain things and that they indicated that the bodies were perhaps east of the land under consideration. We also found this in the private memoirs of an individual who had been a child at the time of the outbreak. We told the city that the only way to know for sure was to undertake an archaeological excavation, which they did, which subsequently showed that the records provided the correct information and there were no bodies on the riverfront.
We felt, when we heard that, we felt a little bit like Lady Macbeth, who said, well, thank goodness it's not in my palace. On the one hand, we felt very sorry for these people, but on the other hand, we did feel just a little bit relieved that they were not on the area that was to be developed. So that was a very striking and very practical example as to how a very, very practical application of archives answered for us a very urgent question.
As we make more and more information, the paths to the past can get difficult to find, and it becomes even more important that we understand what should be discarded, what must be kept, and how it should be preserved. That's the job of archives, helping people to pick up the trail.
People not being